to help us along with our learning today are two people. This is kind of a different format for us, and only Marco could persuade us to do something like this. We normally only just have one person, but today we have two people. You have their biography with you in front of them. I'm not going to read them, but let me tell you that Marco Campana and Christopher Wulff are the brains behind one of the most exciting online communities in Ontario, if not Canada, called settlements.org. It is a fabulous place for all things settlement, and how they have grown it and kept growing it and kept making it vibrant and accessible. We have lots to learn from them. So I don't know where they're hiding. Marco and Fred, come on up, guys. Yeah. Each of them. Chris have been given strict instructions to, Chris will do 2.5 ideas, and Marco will do 2. We can only tolerate 5, no more. So over to you, and we'll talk again after the 20 minutes.
So, hello. Thank you all for coming. It's very exciting to see so many of you here. I know we were kind of amazed to see the original registrations. When it crossed the 100 mark, we went, oh boy, okay, well, we need to really get going here.
We should plan something.
We should plan something. So we're both really glad to be here. My name is Christopher Wulff. I work for the Community Social Planning Council of Toronto as a communications coordinator. This is Marco Campana. He's the Online Capacity Development Coordinator for OCASI, the Ontario Council of Agencies for this. And so we are both kind of fully embedded in both social change sectors as well as the technology behind it and how it supports how it can support that work. And so we're coming with the 5 good ideas that we managed to come up with. And we're actually giving this talk, probably, or some variation of this talk, to about 700 people this month at varying conferences. So there are tons of people in social change sectors, in community service sectors, who are looking to this question and have experienced challenges up to this point with figuring out where it fits strategically in their organizations. A lot of times I think we're seeing these kind of technologies and we understand them from a social media sense, from a consumption sense, and from a very informal sense, but how they work within a service context, how they work within a social change context is quite different. And I think one of the things that we're really going to focus on is recognizing that you already have the capacity. That these are primarily just tools in a toolbox. And the knowledge you already hold is what's necessary to do this work. And we're going to try and contextualize it in the areas that you've come from in the past and where you're coming from today, and using the knowledge you already have to make it plain that this is actually not as innovative or as confusing as it kind of is perceived to be right now. So Marco's going to talk to you a little bit about kind of the imperative behind this and why the dynamics and the changing demographics have made this more of an issue right now, and also talk about the potential of it and how it's affecting different communities right now. And then we're going to go into the 5 good ideas. Then you're going to have a chance to talk to your tables about your experience with some of these questions, and we're going to float around from table to table, trying to collect some of those questions, trying to answer some of them. But it's important to know that we're really just setting a foundation for this, and we're not going to be talking about technology really to any significant extent. That really our focus is on where does it fit strategically. How does conversation online mirror conversations and consultations and discussions that you're already having in your work and you already know how to do? So I'm going to pass it over to Marco now. And
just a little housekeeping note. We don't have a PowerPoint or handouts and slides for you, but everything that we're talking about, one of the 5 good resources is a little website that where we're going to be posting all of this stuff. So you don't need to write furiously. All the notes will be there. Hopefully we'll be able to continue the discussion and have a conversation ourselves online after this about some of these things. In terms of the imperative, there's lots of good data out there right now. And I think, again, I'm going to throw a bunch of stats at you. The stuff will be available online. But it's useful if we need to justify some of the reasons why we're doing things. It's useful to plug into some of this stuff. And there's a lot of good Canadian data as well. So just really quickly, if I say to you that youth aged 12 to 17, almost all of them, 96% of them are using the internet to some degree. That's not going to surprise you, probably, because that's the group we associate the most with internet use. But if we start to dig in and we say that, well, they've actually moved away from email now, and they're using Facebook and text messaging as one of their primary mechanisms of communication, that might be a little bit of a surprise, and it might make you think about, well, that's maybe why I'm not reaching people if I'm trying to email youth all the time, because if they're not there, then I'm not actually getting them. Another thing that might surprise you as well is that if we think of people age 60 and over, we don't necessarily think of them as technology adopters, but a recent survey said 51% of Canadians age 60 and over are using the internet. Now, they're using it differently than you. So again, if you're looking at them as an audience, you've got to look at how they're using it. I look at my own father as an example. He's 70, didn't use the internet for his whole life. He is not a content creator, but he is an avid consumer of information. And he might not engage with you, but he'll be there reading and lurking and listening and evaluating and thinking critically about what you're giving to him. So he's on the net and he's using it. In general, 78% of Canadians are internet users, and 80% of those have high-speed connections. So if you're starting to look at technologies, internet high speed is very important, but there's 20% of people who aren't who are on dial-up still, or do not have that kind of internet access. So not everybody is online, and that's important to look at. And if you start to segment that in our sector, for example, we work with newcomers to Canada, and stats tell us that about 66% of newcomers use the internet. So conceivably a lower level than the average Canadian. But if you look at only the last 10 years, they're 78% as well. Newer newcomers are using the internet just as much as Canadians are, but if you look at it as well, they're using it differently, right? They're coming from, a lot of these people are coming from countries where mobile internet use, PDAs and smartphones are much more avidly used than here. So if we're looking at our typical way of getting out to people, we may be missing the mark. We may not be getting to those people in the formats that they're used to. So again, stats tell you a little bit, but you've got to constantly dig deeper into each one of them. Another interesting one that I thought was kind of fun, that the heavy internet users, that's people who use the internet more than 15 hours a week at home, I think there are about 40% of those people. And interestingly, one of the studies says that those people are actually still spending more time with their families than we would think. Now, I think that might be a polling issue, that people feel bad when they realize they're using that much. So they say, yes, watching TV with my son is quality family time. But the reality is, again, stats tell us some story, but they're saying they're able to manage both. They're also still very traditional media consumers. So they're not just online. They're still reading the newspaper. They're still watching TV. They're still interacting in other ways. So if we, again, focus everything in one domain, one channel of access to people, we're still missing people who are accessing other areas and are still reading the subway ads, who are still opening up the Metro newspaper, who are still reading newspapers, books, newsletters, all those types of things. And that's really important to look at. So those are just a few stats. There are more that we'll post online, but it's really useful to see that there is a lot of information about people in our target audiences. But we also have to realize that that's just a starting point. We always have to dig a little bit deeper. So part of what we're getting at here is that you've got to know your audience. So the first good idea, and we're going to be melding throughout of them, is that for us, like Christopher said, these are foundational things. You can't build your internet strategy just on technology. And we will show you technology. We will speak to that because you're going to have questions about some of that in the discussion. But we wanted to start by talking not about technology, but just about the way you do your work. So an online conversation is still just a conversation. If you're not engaged with your community, if you're not using the language where they are, or having them come to you in a meaningful way, you're not engaging them in any way that will actually work for them. And the language will actually change, so we can talk about what it is to have an online conversation versus offline, but the reality of how we do it is very similar. So if I say we're going to do a collaborative online space, well, I think a community conversation or a town hall meeting, we already do those. We know how to do those. The things that you put into doing an online collaborative conversation are very similar. It has to be facilitated, it has to be engaging. You have to be prepared to share power and give and lead and contribute and own and cede some control. If I say an online social interaction, well, we already do those. They're drop-ins or they're clubs that we run in our agencies. Product-based interaction or conversation, well, we give brochures. We give information about our services in some meaningful way. Service delivery online, e-service delivery, well, we do one-on-one help. We do workshops. If I say e-learning, well, you run training and workshops for your clients already. The way you do that isn't necessarily going to change. You're simply doing it in another domain. We're building community. Well, we all do some form of community development. So again, the leap online, you don't forget all of the things that you're already doing. You don't wash away what you know about community development and how you work with your clients or stakeholders or donors. And if you're doing advocacy or calls for action, online. You're doing advocacy and events and workshops offline as well. If you're campaigning online, well, maybe you're doing some form of door-to-door work, or you're trying to reach people actively that way. Again, the difference between online and offline is just the domain and the channel. You have to remember that everything you already know about community engagement, everything you already know about service delivery is already there, and it's important not to forget about it. Now, the tools you use to do that can make a difference, and we'll talk a bit more about technology, but in reality you can go for, you might have heard this kind of stuff, in online conversations you can have one-to-one, which would be email typically. If you email me, I email you back. You can have one-to-many, which might be a discussion group or a newsletter, so I send one message, it goes out to many people. Within that you can also have many-to-many, so an email list can also be participatory, where you're sending something out and other people are posting things, or it could be an online discussion board. All of these things are possible within all the different technologies. So a blog can also be one-to-one, or if you only have one reader, it can be one-to-many if you don't allow people to post comments. But it can be many-to-many, and it can itself be a conversation if you allow people to post comments. And we see blogs, you probably surf them yourselves, where there are dozens, if not hundreds of comments after a blog post sometimes. And the author of the post is him or herself responding or posting some of those comments. This is a conversation. We don't see it in the same way. We think conversation online must be a discussion forum. Well, no, a blog post and reactions is itself a conversation, and it's becoming one of the most popular forms of online conversations that we see, and also one of the easiest and cheapest to implement. And then you have to decide, are my conversations this style of asynchronous, or are they real time? Am I going to engage in webinars or instant messaging or video conferencing or video chats? Am I using Skype? And again, within those technologies, you can still do one-to-one, one-to-many, or many-to-many. I was doing a webinar the other day where there were 4 of us with our video cameras engaging in a conversation and sharing a workspace. That is a many-to-many conversation. That is a combination of online and offline tools. So the next point is, if you're going to do this work, you have to integrate it with your offline work. And I think that's a big theme throughout what we're talking about. You can't just decide that I'm going to do this discussion forum and it's not part of somebody's work, because it'll just fail. If it's simply an add-on to your work, if it's simply something that's driven by your IT department, as we know in a lot of cases, it's the IT department that drives it, it's an add-on, it's not integrated, you don't really see the reason for doing it, it's destined more or less to fail. And in terms of conversations, again, if you're not having effective and good conversations with your clients or constituencies or groups right now, going online with it is not going to be your salvation. Because again, the way you do it is the same as you're doing it offline. So if you start a discussion forum, build it, highlight it on your homepage and say, all right, let's start chatting. But the moment someone posts a question, you don't respond for 4 days, you've already started to lose that social capital. You've already started to lose the reason why someone might come back, because you're not engaging with them. You're not answering those questions. If someone emails you a question via a website, how many of us have done that with a government website? You can email them all like crazy now with forms, but do you ever get a response within a timely fashion? What's the point of creating that form? That's a conversation, and they've lost some social capital. That's an engagement strategy that has failed for that website, because they created an expectation. Now, the real internet expectation of, if I email you, I get a response in 5 minutes, is perhaps something that needs to be managed a bit more, but you can do that with your technology. If someone submits a form, you can say, we will take 24 to 48 hours to get back to you. But if you manage it and you don't meet it, then again, just like offline, if you say, I'll return your phone call in an hour, and you don't, you've lost some credibility with that person. It's the same online. It's no different. You just have to manage it and make sure that your expectations, the expectations your clients have, are realistic based on what you're able to provide. But that will also all fall apart if you're not connected and integrated with your offline work. If your employment counselor is working 35 hours a week providing one-to-one and group counseling, and is expected to reply to emails, post to discussion areas, and blog, and that's not part of those 35 hours, well, when are they going to get to it, right? It's not going to happen, and they'll post something, and 6 months later they'll post something else, and they'll say, you see, no one's coming. No one wants to read my stuff. Well, because the expectations of that environment are different, and you have to be able to meet those. So in a lot of cases as well, when we talk about online conversations, a lot of people talk about it in the form of campaigns, and we're trying to get people to donate money, and we're trying to get people to listen to our cause and things like that. And there's a lot out there about this. So what we want to talk a little bit about is the notion of social service, e-service delivery online. The idea of extending the work that you're doing online. And there are some principles that we think are important. One is that we think with this, or I think, technology in an e-service delivery is useful if it complements a relationship already in progress. Which means what? Which means if I'm seeing you one-on-one, Instead of you coming to the office next time, because it's a 2-hour bus ride and 3 tokens, maybe we can figure out a way to interact with each other online, whether it's by email, which if I asked you how many of you are interacting with clients by email, I'm sure all of your hands would go up. We don't think of that as service delivery, but we all do it. That is electronic service delivery, and you better be doing it well, because the next steps are just heightening that. So what is your email etiquette? What is your response time? Are you, in fact, meeting those needs? Those are important things to think about in e-service delivery. It's not necessarily thinking we're going to suddenly serve 50,000 more clients with our online space. You might eventually, but your goal as in e-service delivery is probably just to start small and augment the stuff you're doing with people you're already working with, because they may live far away. They may be working full-time. Our sector's rife with that. We have people in survival jobs who cannot come to a 9-to-5 Monday to Friday office because they're working 2 jobs. But if they can send an email and get a reply in a couple of days, visit an online discussion board, read an article that you post, there are different ways, and then comment on that in a blog or whatever it might be. There are different ways for us to engage those people that don't mean we've lost any human service interaction with them. It's a minimal increase for the staff if we've integrated it well. And we also recognize that it's not for all our clients. Remember, if only 78% of people are online, if 80% of people have internet access, it's one channel of service. You don't suddenly say to your clients, we will now see you once and everything else will be online. Because just like any service you deliver, you've got to make sure that you are integrating it well with the clients that you're serving. So you're doing needs assessment. You're looking, are my clients that group of 78% of newcomers who are actually, or are they maybe higher need and don't have access to computers? Maybe they have literacy issues. They don't have even a library card to be able to access the internet that way. What are the issues for my client group? Are they fitting that profile or not? And another reason of integration is you better be good at what you're doing and you better know your tools very well, because if you don't, the level of dissatisfaction you're going to run into is going to be very high. Some really good research came out recently that looked at, as gadgets become more important to people, the level of frustration also increases, because how many of us have had an internet connection fail? How many of us have had that blue screen of death in our computer, Mac users excluded? That's incredibly frustrating. And users who use technology are more and more likely to feel discouraged, confused, impatient when they're trying to fix something. Imagine if that's compounded by them trying to access service with this technology. So your website is down, your blog is down. If you don't have multiple channels of access for that person, you're going to have even more reasons for people to be impatient or frustrated. And so you can't discount our inherent frustration with technology, and that just gets augmented more and more if what you've built, either A, you're not serving it well, or it's built on a shoddy foundation and it's breaking, or it's simply not working. And the flip side of that is, just like in our regular service, someone else is probably trying to engage and serve your audience. Don't give them a reason to go away based on bad technology use or bad integration or bad service. So you may not want to rush into technology, but if your audience is there, and Christopher will speak to this a bit more, then you need to be there with them. If they're using technology, and if they expect you to be, and they're in places, you don't necessarily need to build it, but you need to be there with them and participating and showing them that you're users of this technology as well in a service fashion. They're not looking for service providers to be cool users of technology, but they need to be users of technology in a meaningful way to be able to provide that kind of service.
And that technology question is really one of the big ones that's going around right now. There's a fellow named Stephen Matthews who runs a blog called Slaw. Well, I don't know how it's supposed to be pronounced because it's one of those strange internet things, but S-Law or whatever it's called. And his focus is on how lawyers can use technology effectively to provide services, to engage in debate with other lawyers, to converse. And so one of the things that he kind of talked about was what you want to look at. Sorry, you should go back. When you're looking at technology, and particularly when you're choosing to do a new project, that you want to experiment wide and implement deep. That you really want to take a look at all the pieces that are out there. And it's tempting, honestly, in these kinds of workshops, to come out and just wow you with technology. To do the whiz-bang show of this is what it could do and this is how it can solve your life. But technology isn't really meant to do that in effective ways. It's just another tool. And so really you need to get out there and see the things that are going on, to examine how your audience is already using these pieces. So if I said Twitter, who in the room would have any idea what I'm talking about? Holy crap. Sorry, that's honestly, that's an astonishing response. I'll give you that, that's great. I don't know if it's actually good.
How many people are using Twitter? Or know how to use it?
Yeah, that's a better way to do it.
We all read about Twitter.
Right. So, Twitter's an example of a technology that got a whole lot of attention really quickly. And people will kind of jump on this bandwagon and be, absolutely, I have to Twitter. I have to Twitter all the time. And there's a guy in Kingston, there's a little young guy who's the most persistent Twitterer in the world. And I met him at a conference last year, and he like updates his thing like 35 times a day with this constant stream of what he's doing. You know, so people got into this kind of technology of, you know, Twitter. And just, you know, the word itself is this kind of thing that builds anxiety. But there's a lot of these technologies out there that people try to sell you as revolutionary, as these brand new things. And it's important to kind of know what they are, to take a look at them and say, okay, you know, open mind, is this something that has application? It may be. And being really open to these things, and also kind of nurturing this culture of creativity and exploration within your organizations. Because oftentimes the struggle that we come up against is, you know, one or two people in an organization will kind of jump on this stuff and have a real interest in it, see the potential with the client base, but will run up against walls inside the organization. So it's partly about changing the mindset across an organization to be more experimental, to be open to the potential. And so really the important thing when it comes to technology is you can't divorce the technology, you can't isolate the technology from the content and from the community that you're trying to build with it. Oftentimes the technology itself becomes the story. I can't tell you how many, a couple of years ago, really more than now, but you used to see articles in organization newsletters talking about how they've implemented an SSL FTP. And my being like, well, I understand what that means and why that's interesting, but for most people, who the hell cares? You know, and so often you'd see these people kind of talking about the technology itself and how they were on the cutting edge of the technology, and not, this is how it's changing the lives of our clients. This is how it's changing the way we're doing service, and this is how it's embedded in our work processes. Because that's the other question. When you're looking at these technologies, you want to be looking for something that is comfortable and easy to use, and that's often the complaint that we get. And that's where experimenting widely is a really real benefit, because you can get exposed to a whole bunch of different systems and find the one that fits best for you. Because oftentimes people will kind of get sold by a consultant. They'll get sold on a flashy technology, and it's not necessarily the right one. So really you want to have a system that allows you to test without committing until you're ready. Going into it as an open process of, these are my requirements, and setting all the same requirements that you do in any other, you know, RFP that you put out, any other contract engagement you have, is about, you know what you need. You need to do that before you start looking at the technologies itself. And so that's really kind of one of the key points that we want to look at is, don't isolate the technology from the content and from the purpose that you're trying to achieve.
And the last part of that as well, is I would say, is that if you've invested well in the technology and if you understand it, you have to be the most powerful user of your own technology. I mean, some of your users will get there as well, but if it's stable, if you're using the technology well, it's not what becomes the conversation. It's merely the platform. It's merely what people use to engage you, or you engage them in conversation. But if the technology is an issue, it becomes part of the conversation. Oh, I don't like this feature. Oh, this doesn't work for me. And that's not what you want in an online conversation, because you're not focused on the technology for your conversations or your service delivery. You're focused on something more, the content, the essence, and that's really important. And YouTube's a great example of that. It's a simple way to do video, and the stuff that's the most popular there isn't the most technically interesting video on YouTube. It's the stuff that's interesting from a it's the laughing baby. It's the cat that's playing with something. You get millions of hits, and it's not about a beautiful, really well-produced video. It's about interesting content. So you can get away with ignoring technology if your content is really good, and that's really where you want to focus. So it's important that you don't let it become part of the conversation after you've made the decision to go forward with it, or else you will get derailed by it a lot of times. So in our organization, for example, we had an internal staff site, and some people refer to it as the internal site, the staff wiki. Well, wiki is a kind of technology. But that throws half of us off. Well, wiki, what's a wiki? Well, I don't understand a wiki. How do I use it? Well, it's a site where we can collaborate and leave it at that. You don't have to tell them what the technology is. You just have to tell them and help them understand how it works. Some people will be interested that it's a wiki, but most people, if I say to them, it's as easy as creating a Word document using track changes so I can see what changes you made and what I made, they're like, oh yeah, okay, I know Word, I know track changes. You're connecting things again, right? It's really important. Then they'll start using it and they won't feel intimidated by it. But if I say it's a collaborative workspace where we can monitor each other's stuff and build, and this, it's pointless to some people because that's not where they're at. They're not interested in what the technology is. They just want to know how they can use it. So the next point, sorry, no, we go back and forth. Your conversations are going to evolve over time, and you need to be prepared to evolve with them. And that, for a lot of people in organizations, sometimes means letting some control go. In an online conversation, first of all, as we talked about, you have to decide why you're doing it, but you have to be prepared for it to evolve. You may start as the hub, as the expert, as the leader, but you may eventually morph into a participant, someone who's merely facilitating access, someone who is sharing information and redirecting, but not necessarily leading the conversation. That's not always easy for organizations, so you have to be aware that online that can happen, and that can happen very quickly. The other thing is that you, online in a conversation, have to get used to the fact, some people call it the 99-1 rule. 90% of people are lurkers. They're there, but they're not actively engaging. 9% are kind of contributing every now and then, and 1% are your most frequent contributors, your power users. And some people refer to this as online discussions as web theater, because you may not be able to, you may not use your online discussion tool to talk to or talk with your audience, but you're talking to them by engaging in conversations with your most frequent contributors, because other people are watching the conversation and they're learning from it, they're paying attention to it. And that will morph over time. My best example is what Ratman talked about with this settlement.org. When settlement.org started, there was a discussion area. No uptake whatsoever. We took it off the site. Eventually, we started getting a lot of emails from site users, so we were responding to email one-to-one, lots of back and forth. We started to notice there were very similar questions that people were asking, so we started creating form emails, and we were still one-to-one. Then we realized we were really getting a lot of similar emails, so we said, you know what, we need to email people in a way that other people can see the answers to these questions, because we can't always put them up as articles quickly enough, because they're just little one-offs, but it's content. We're creating content for our site. So we brought back in the discussion area, and that's where we posted the answers to those emails. And then the email response that we sent back was, your question has been answered here. Feel free to register and post a follow-up question if you'd like to. And for the most part, it was still almost one-to-one, because people weren't posting follow-ups. But then all of a sudden, we saw people were reading it. No one was replying, but one reply got 50 reads. Well, that surely couldn't be just that same person. People with similar situations were reading those replies. So we knew we were getting onto something. But we didn't choose an FAQ section, we chose the discussion area. And that was a kind of arbitrary choice that later came to pan out really well. So eventually we started restricting where people could actually send us email. We didn't restrict it completely because you don't want to do that, but where once you could submit a form, we said, oh, why don't you ask your question in the discussion area? So we forced people into that discussion area. And it was still very much a Q&A. They asked, we answered. They asked, we answered. They asked, we were the expert. Then all of a sudden, some people started posting answers. And then suddenly some people started just sharing information and having conversations that had nothing to do with the question and answer about settlement, but this was my landing experience. Here was my experience finding housing. And all of a sudden, we developed site experts. People started becoming these frequent contributors. And people started asking them questions directly instead of to the moderator of the site. And before we knew it, we have a site where we've got 13,000 members. 6,000 of those actually post. So people are registering even though they don't necessarily need to read it. We've got 40,000 posts, and we've got people who are posting on average responses one a day. These are our most frequent contributors. Since 2005, we've got 2 people who are actually posting on average 1 reply a day to people. Our moderator is averaging 3.5 replies a day. So these people are almost as prolific as someone who's paid to monitor the staff. We've got conversations that are happening where there are, in fact, massive replies. We've got one about an eligibility exam for dentists, 246 replies, but 55,000 reads. not 55,000 people, but it's been read 55,000 times. So there are people who are coming to our site who are not at all engaging with us, but they are following the conversation. They are looking at how we're answering these questions. They're looking at how people are having conversations, and they're part of those conversations. They're that 90% of people who are lurking. They're just there for the information, and that's a valid conversation piece. It's a little different. I mean, when we're in a room with people, we try to get everyone in the room to say something if we're in a workshop, for example. But when you're in a group like this or in a town hall, you have people who are just there to listen, who are going to leave, who are never going to put their hand up, who are never going to ask a question, who are never going to participate, except that they are. They're there. And it's the same thing with online, except sometimes you hit massive scale of people. So there are 55,000 people in this case who are learning about something without us having to engage them directly. And that's a huge thing.
I think it's also adding to what you've done also, you've extended the network of the information you've got. Because while, was it 200 and some odd responses, the 55,000 people are taking that information and distributing it elsewhere. Some of them are doing it online, and thus further expanding that audience. And it's kind of one of these things of the way that the web works, the way that information distribution works now, which is kind of this exponential growth potential. And so looking to participatory people as kind of key informants and people who are pushing your message out there, pushing your information out there. And you were always looking for those people in the past. You're always looking for those people who had the ear of their community. And a lot of these people are, and taking your information and taking your message and moving it forward.
Exactly. So you want to harness the enthusiasts because they're going to be, it's a reality in most online sites that a small percentage of people who are actually there are actively participating. So, and again, the rest are watching. They're seeing how you interact with them. They're seeing how the conversation evolves. They're participating in it. So you want to make sure that you're engaging them and harnessing that. And then the final thing about how it will, so our site evolved from one-to-one to many, and a community. And there are, I can point to some tangible reasons, but some of it we're not quite sure. And in our organization, it evolved from part of someone's job to a half-time job to now someone who's a full-time job moderating our discussion area, and we could use another person at this point. Thankfully, we have some power users because they answer at least one of those a day. But the reality is that it had to become part of our work and then extended beyond.
And one of those users is actually in Vancouver. The geographic distribution kind of amplified it as well. And 30%, last time I saw, I think 30% of our users were overseas in preparation for arrival.
So it's a pre-settlement tool, which is exactly what we had hoped. So that being said, all different kinds of online community and conversations require different strategies, and that's the out for all of this, is that there's no one fit. What worked for settlement.org may not work for you. What worked for another site may not work for you. It's part of that going back and understanding who is it that we're trying to talk to, what are we trying to say to them, where are they participating already, how do we really want to, you've got to really think this through, because I can't just say to you the settlement.org model is the one to implement in your place, just like the Facebook model isn't necessarily the one to implement in your organization. You really got to look at, evaluating what it is that you want to do and why, and where your audience is. Really, again, it's nothing that you wouldn't already do if you were starting a new program in your agency. You would do a needs assessment, you would sit down and do focus groups, you would talk to your users, you would understand them. Same thing here, you're just understanding them in a slightly different space and the way they use a technology, but you still have to do that. You can't forget the fundamentals and the foundation.
So our last good idea, we'll call it don't innovate, participate. And really this is kind of a realization that there are a number of us in the technology and nonprofit world who suffer from what we call NAWS, which is not another website syndrome. And it's this constant kind of malaise of seeing development works and stuff going out and saying, we want to develop another website. That's the answer to this problem. We need to develop another website. Because, that's what's needed. How many people in the room have looked at developing a new website in the last year? Websites are part of the answer, and they are. But really the important lesson to take from how technology has evolved in the last couple of years is that there's a real movement towards interoperability, towards open standards. And that your key is actually not to be a solo producer, to be an isolated place, or necessarily to gather people to you, but instead to go where they are, to work with them in the way that they're working. And so with youth projects now, oftentimes they won't develop websites, they'll develop a Facebook page, because that's where their population is. They won't develop email response systems, they'll develop SMS text responses because that's what their client base uses. And so it's appropriate technology for them. When you're looking at these questions, and I think it's one of these ones, it's a bit of a hazard sometimes, because oftentimes funders look to projects and want to see some visual representation of the project in the form of a website, and it's looked at as an independent piece and not an integrated piece of work. And so one of the things that we talk about a lot is that what you want to be trying to do is to engage people where they are. And so in the case of settlement.org, there's a couple of organizations who provide answers to questions in the settlement, in the discussion forum. And so rather than trying to say, okay, you know what, we've got these experts who want to answer questions for newcomers, and so we're going to build a discussion forum on our site and spend thousands of dollars in marketing to bring them to us. Instead, we're going to go where they already are. We're going to go where they're already answering questions, where they're asking questions, and we're going to offer our expertise, because that's what we have. What we hold is the expertise and the knowledge. Sometimes we have communities, and sometimes we have large online communities, but really what we want to do is go where people are and talk to them where they are in the language that they're used to, and in that kind of same context. So yeah, that's really kind of one of the focuses we wanted to try and address, is that you shouldn't necessarily, and I'm not saying this isn't as a rule, because sometimes there are communities that need to be created online. We're creating, or sorry, I keep saying we. The OCASI is creating a website for LGBT newcomers, because it doesn't exist at the moment. A safe space for people to get settlement information that is appropriate to that context. And it's a place that didn't exist, and it's a place where the audience isn't all using the same technology. And so sometimes if people aren't in the same place as a group, you need to create some new space. And the important thing there is to use the systems they already understand. I remember being in a workshop a couple of years ago with people who want to talk about navigation systems and innovative navigation systems. And I kind of liken innovative navigation systems on websites to being reversing all the buttons on your remote control. It makes it really difficult to use. You want to stick with the same consistent systems that people have come up and that they figured out how to use. They know how to navigate a blog. They know how to navigate a system that has a header and has a sidebar. And that's what you're going to give them because it's what they expect. It makes it easier for them to use. And so as much as people are kind of shown these new innovative systems, don't kind of look at how it's going to impact people's ability to use and access your information. Stay focused on the client base and who's going to be using it.
And if it doesn't exist, and all the research and the needs assessment you've done says that there isn't something, like the LGBTQ site or a newcomer site, go ahead and build it. But don't forget that there are pieces of it that you don't necessarily need to build. So the LGBTQ and our newcomer youth site, they're going to use Facebook, they're going to use YouTube, because that's where some of the audience is already, and they'll be able to integrate it into their site. But they're partially going to be going to where they are already, and partially adding to it by giving them something that doesn't exist. So they're not trying to give it all. They're not trying to be a social networking and a video hosting site and the article content. They're giving them what's missing and then contributing and pulling in from what's already out there already. It'll save a lot of money, but it also just makes sense strategically.
Yeah, and they're also, I mean, the other avenue you're looking at there is also bringing more experts into your system and being an expert to other systems. So, historically, we've started to try and get an article we've written into somebody's newsletter, into some community paper, and we try and offer our expertise out. And you need to kind of follow the same kind of principles online. Go participate in other places. Be a leader in that way. There's a fellow named Brian Solis, who is one of the kind of real innovators of social media. And one of his real things is right now, we are producing a glut. We are producing static. Because people are writing posts and blogs and stuff everywhere, and there's an overwhelming number. And you go to Google and you get 20 billion responses to some piece. And there's nothing going on right now that's pulling people together, that's pulling those pieces of information together. And so the participation in online communities is oftentimes going to be more valid than setting up a system of your own. Like going to these places and engaging in discussion, to answering questions. Canadian Desi is a website that serves, there's a very large number of people on that site, and it serves the Southeast Asian, or South Asian community, primarily in Canada. And it's one of those places that you want to go to the audience. You want to go where they are, because they found a trusted network, they found a trusted system, and going and working with them and offering the expertise you have. And these exist for a large number of communities, and so going to where people are, engaging with them there is an important value. So that's basically the extent of the 5 good ideas we came to offer you today. I hope you counted them off as we went through. So our presentation and all the resources that we have in our notes will be up on learnatwork.ca, which is the last resource on your piece of paper. So we're going to give you a chance now to talk at your tables about some of the experiences you've had, some of the challenges that you've had. And if you have particular questions around technology, some of them we might be able to answer, and some of them we may say, you know, we'll talk to you afterwards.
Or it depends.
Or it depends. That's our favorite answer. Really, that's the start of every answer. But we'll be circulating from table to table if you have questions and trying to collect some of those questions. So, yep.
Oh, I just wanted to compliment you on the site, because I went into settlement.org a couple of weeks ago, because one of our youth workers had mentioned this. And I was looking for a video or something, and it was just, you know, very easy to navigate. Very easy. It just felt like a very inviting place to be.
That's fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's actually, you're saying it's easy to navigate is an important thing to us, because we went out and did user testing. This is an important process in web projects. User testing, it can be unbelievably expensive if you do it one way. It can also be what we did, which was go to the Newcomer Information Center, pay 10 people $20 each, and sit beside them as we asked them to try and find things. And watching them do it, and we realized that not 1 in the 20 used the search engine. They all used the site navigation because they took that as instructions. They took that as our being selective about, well, they're going to put the right information in front of my face if I follow the path they've given me, which is a different mindset, but it's how our users use the site. So it's important to do user testing to understand how people are going to look for information and use your tools.